Do you need to use a matcha sifter when preparing matcha tea? At this point, you may have seen our videos where we sift the matcha powder into a bowl before preparing the matcha tea, but is this necessary? In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about the matcha sifter and why you may want to use one. Before we get started, it would really mean a lot to us if you could subscribe to our YouTube channel and stay tuned for future tea videos. We have hundreds of tea videos on all sorts of topics related to Japanese green tea, but for this episode, we're going to focus on the matcha sifter specifically. Without further ado, let's get started. What is a matcha sifter? A matcha sifter, or furui, is the sifter used to make matcha tea. There are certain types of matcha sifters that are specifically designed for sifting matcha powder, but these are not necessary. Any type of metal sifter can be a matcha sifter, as long as it's the right size. These matcha sifters are also available in plastic as well, as some believe the metal can negatively affect the flavor of the matcha powder. We like to avoid using plastic wherever possible, so we stick to the metal matcha sifter. Ideally, this sifter is small enough to rest on the top of the matcha bowl so the powder can be sifted directly into it. What are the benefits of the matcha sifter? When you open up a tin of matcha tea, the fine powder is exposed to the humidity in the air. This will immediately cause the clumps to form in the matcha powder. This is not a sign of a low-quality matcha, nor does it mean that the matcha powder has gone bad. The clumps can, however, negatively affect the flavor of your tea. When the matcha clumps are submerged into water, they do not break up completely. This means that the matcha is unable to mix evenly into the water. The tea will take on more of a watery taste rather than a rich, creamy flavor profile. The texture will also become more gritty and unpleasant. The good news is you can solve this problem with a simple matcha sifter. By pushing the matcha powder through the matcha sifter, you are able to break up the clumps of powder. When you position the matcha whisk over a matcha bowl and sift the powder properly, you should be left with a fine green powder at the bottom, without the clumps. If you really want to take this a step further, you can start by just adding a tiny bit of water into the matcha powder and mixing it into a paste. When the matcha is in a paste form, it is easier for you to see the clumps as they form and smooth them out. Once you have done this, you can then mix in the rest of the water, whisk it up, and enjoy your smoother matcha tea. Do they use the matcha sifter in the Japanese tea ceremony? The traditional matcha sifter, or furui, is used in the Japanese tea ceremony, but you may not see it. The matcha powder is pre-sifted beforehand before being brought into the tea room with the natsume. If you ever get a chance to take part in a Japanese tea ceremony, you will notice that the tea master is scooping out finely sifted matcha powder, but you may not see them physically using the matcha sifter. The matcha sifter is nevertheless an important part of the Japanese tea ceremony, and an important tool for making matcha tea. How to use the matcha sifter. Step 1. Place the matcha sifter on top of a matcha bowl or chawan. Most of these matcha sifters should have a lip on the end which will allow it to balance on top of the matcha bowl. Step 2. Add 2 grams of matcha powder into the sifter. This is the perfect measurement for a bowl of matcha tea. Step 3. Use a spoon to push the matcha powder through the sifter. This should take under a minute to get all the powder through, but the time can vary depending on the amount of powder you're using. Step 4. After you have a layer of finely sifted powder at the base of the matcha bowl, you can add in the water and start preparing your tea. Where can you get a matcha sifter? If you search for a matcha sifter or furui online, you should be able to find a few different options. If possible, try to find one that includes a wire handle and a lip so that you can balance it on top of the matcha bowl. You also should look for one that has a relatively fine mesh, because matcha particles are very small, and in order to separate them, you need a very small mesh sifter. I hope you have found this video to be helpful. While the matcha sifter can make a big difference in the overall taste of your matcha tea, if you don't have one, it's no reason not to get started into the world of matcha tea. Matcha can be a fun experience and ritual to enjoy, and we have some great matcha tea sets to help you get started. With the Matcha Sampler bundle, you get to try 21 different kinds of matcha tea from all over Japan, and you get the matcha bowl, matcha whisk, and matcha spoon included. Not only do you get to try different premium matcha tea grown without pesticides, but you also get all the tools you need in order to prepare them. When you order our tea, you are not just helping to support us, but also the dozens of talented farmers we have the privilege of working with. If you made it to the end of the video, we thank you so much for watching, and we would really appreciate it if you could subscribe to our channel and stay tuned for future tea videos. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. Until then, we'll see you next time.